friends, it's Niina from the Little Woman podcast. This episode was a listener request, so I was being asked to give recommendations of Scandinavian children's books, also adults can enjoy, same way as people enjoy Little Woman. Most of these recommendations that I am going to share are from Finland and from Sweden, because those are the books that I am most familiar with. But if somebody knows good books from Norway, Denmark, or Iceland that fit into this category, feel free to leave comments so we can all get more recommendations. For Little Woman fans, I'm going to start with Finnish classics, and those are, of course, Moomins. Before we go to the Moomin books, I should probably explain Moomins to people who are unfamiliar with Moomins. Moomins are characters that were created by Finnish-Swedish writer, artist, and illustrator Tove Jansson. She lived in Finland most of her life, but she spoke Swedish as her native language. She lived most of her life in Helsinki, and her father was actually sculptor Vicary Jansson. In Helsinki, you can actually see some of his statues. There's one in the park of Esplanadi, and it shows a mermaid playing with her little brother. It's actually Tove Jansson with her little brother, and their father used them as models for the statue. So if somebody wants to make a Moomin pilgrimage, there's a place that you can go. The Moomins were created by Tove Jansson. They started out as a book series in the 1940s. Then later on she also made Moomin comics with her brother. And the Moomin comics were originally published in England. So Moomins are also very popular in Britain. Also in Scandinavian countries, very, very, very popular in Japan. There's Moomin mugs, Moomin clothes, Moomin curtains, Moomin handbags. There's a theme park in Finland, there's a theme park in Japan. It has definitely been capitalized. But the characters are very popular. There's Moomin Troll, who is the main character, and his parents, Moomin Mamma and Moomin Papa, and their cavalcade of friends. There's Snufkin, who is the Henry David Thoreau of the Moomin world. He's the hermit. He likes camping and traveling. There is Snork Maiden, and there's Sniff. There's Little Me, who is one of the most popular characters. She's very small but very opinionated. That's the main Moomin family. And I think what makes Moomin family similar to the March family is that both families practice radical kindness. And also, both families sort of accept people to their family without any kind of hesitation. They adopt people to be part of their families. The worldview is very empathic. Tove Jansson wrote some really great books, and I'm just going to go through a few of them. And maybe I will talk about other Moomin books in some other episode. If somebody wants to start reading Moomin books as a complete beginner, I would start with Comet in the Moomin Valley. And this is one of the first Moomin books. And this is where most of the main characters are introduced for the first time. Without giving too many spoilers about the plot, the short story is that there is a comet coming to the Moomin Valley, and all kinds of disasters are happening. The sea disappears, there's a freak weather, and all kinds of natural disasters are going on. And the atmosphere is very unsettled in the Moomin Valley. That is where the Moomins live, in a beautiful blue house. The house looks like an old-fashioned round oven because their ancestors used to live in these kind of round ovens. Anyway, Moomin Troll and his friend Sniff, they go on an adventure. They're going to the Lonely Mountains to meet the scientist to understand what is going on and to see the comet and to explore what's happening. And during this adventure they meet Snufkin and other characters for the first time. But it's a very good introduction to the world of the Moomins. This book was published in 1946 for the first time. This was during the Second World War, and I read this from Tove Jansson's biography. She said that the war didn't directly reflect the writing process of the book. The unsettled atmosphere that was going on around the time in the world and in Northern Europe, that is what inspired her to write the book. Okay, my second recommendation is Moominsummer Madness. I hope I get the English translation right. I think it's hilarious. Shakespearean title. This is actually my favorite Moomin book. When I am not doing the Little Woman podcast, I work as an illustrator. That's my day job. Tove Jansson was a master illustrator. She's one of my favorite Finnish illustrators. She was a master at drawing with markers. Every illustration in this book is a masterpiece. And once again, if somebody wants to go to a Moomin pilgrimage, there's a Moomin museum in Tampere, in Finland, and there are some of her original drawings. So she was a master drawer, and that's one of the reasons why I love her books, because of those beautiful illustrations. The story in the Moominsummer Madness is a little similar to the one in the Comet. So there's another natural disaster. This time the sea level is going higher and there's a flood going on in the Moomin Valley. And the Moomins, they see a strange house in the waves and they relocate themselves and they move into an empty theater. And there, all kinds of strange things start happening. My favorite part in this book is the adventure that Snufkin is going through. So Snufkin is very much a rebel. He hates all kinds of orders and being told what to do. When he goes on one of his quests to fight his enemies, he ends up with a bunch of orphan children and he has to take care of them throughout the summer. And little me also gets involved with his adventure. That's one of my favorite parts because he's not very used to being around kids that much. And I love the description of midsummer in this book, probably because I grew up in Finland and the Finnish midsummer solstice, all the traditions that happen in the book, I have done all of them. I did them when I was a child. I still do some of them as an adult. And I'm mainly referring to the bonfires, to looking down to the well, picking 10 flowers at night and do all kinds of summer solstice spells. It gives me lots of nostalgia to the time when I was a child and we celebrate midsummer. My third recommendation is Who Would Comfort Toffle? And this is more of a picture book than a novel, but this is such a pretty picture book. Adults also enjoy it. The story behind this book was that Tove Jansson received fan mail from a boy who was very lonely, and that boy inspired Toffle's character. So Toffle is this young man who lives in a house, and he's very lonely, he's semi-depressed. The book describes loneliness in very profound ways. It describes the feeling of loneliness, feelings of isolation when you are surrounded by people who don't pay attention to you. But in a way, the society also creates loneliness around you. And this book is really about Toffle's journey to getting more self-esteem and finding new friends into his life. He goes on a journey to find himself, and he meets different characters on the way. The illustrations in this book are just gorgeous, and they are just really, really pretty. I grew up reading tons and tons and tons of Astrid Lindgren, and of course, Astrid Lindgren is the most famous Swedish children's book author of all times. The books from Astrid Lindgren that I read were mostly the ones that were meant for girls, or the ones that had really cool, kick-ass female character, but she also has books with boys as leading characters. I will start with my personal favorite, which is Ronja The Robbers' Daughter. My top 3 favorite books of all time are Ronja The Robbers' Daughter by Astrid Lindgren, Little Woman by Louisa May Alcott, and Blue Castle by Lucy Maud Montgomery. So Ronja ranks pretty high on my list. Ronja is not as well known or as popular as Pippi. We will talk about Pippi later, Now, I read lots of fantasy. The setting of the story is quite fantastical. So Ronja lives in a imaginary medieval Sweden with her family, who consists of his father Mattis and his wife Ronja's mother Lovisa. I think it's Lovis in Swedish, and 12 robbers. Her father is the king of thieves, but he's not Robin Hood. He keeps all the money and the goods that he steals. The story takes place like medieval Sweden, when there were robbers actually living in the woods. Ronja lives in a castle, and she's born during a very stormy night, and the lightning strikes and the castle is cut in half. As it happens, I was born in Oulu in northern Finland, and we have castle ruins in Oulu. I can't remember which year it was, but hundreds and hundreds of years ago, there was a storm, and the castle was struck by a lightning, and it caused a fire in the castle, and half of the castle was destroyed. So these things actually happen. Anyway, Ronja grows up here in the castle, and all the thieves are her friends, and she has good time with her mother and her father. And this forest where she lives, it's just a magical forest. It's filled with magical creatures. There are spirits and fairies and all kinds of magical things in the forest. But then it happens that another group of thieves moves to the other side of the castle. It's another thief king, Borka, and his thieves and his son, Birk. Ronja and Birk become friends, and their parents do not like it. The mothers are not so aggressive, but the fathers are just angry because their fathers used to be enemies and fought who is the real king of thieves. But things work out in the end. The whole setting of Ronja the Robber's daughter is just so exciting. There's a bit of like Swedish folklore in it, so it's very exciting book. Hi, this is Niina from the future. My second sequel about Astrid Lindgren disappeared from my phone to the darkness of the bit bucket, so I had to record the whole thing again. Pippi Longstockings is Astrid Lindgren's most famous character. Pippi is popular around the world, but extremely popular in Scandinavian countries and in Germany. The story of Pippi started in the 1940s. Lindgren's daughter was sick, and she began to tell a story to her about a girl who was the strongest person in the world. Pippi Longstockings tells about Pippi. She's a young girl, her face is covered with freckles, and she has orange/red hair that she keeps on two braids. Pippi Longstockings is a young girl who moves into Villa Villekulla, a house she shares with her pet monkey, Mr. Nilsson, and her horse, known as Lilla Guppen, meaning a little old man. She quickly befriends her neighbors, Tommy and Annika. With a suitcase full of gold coins, Pippi lives independently without her parents. Her mother passed away shortly after her birth, and her father, Captain Ephraim Longstocking, was lost at sea before becoming the king of a South Sea island. Pippi joyfully embraces her own way of life, free from social norms. She takes pride in her freckles and worn clothes, refuses to suppress her wild imagination, and has no interest in following conventional manners. Pippi is literate and enjoys storytelling, often spinning exaggerated and imaginative tales. When discussing Pippi, Astrid Lindgren explained that Pippi represents my own childish longing for a person who has power but does not abuse it. Pippi has a temper and she gets angry sometimes, but it is only when she sees somebody else being hurt, was it then a child or an animal or an adult. I was thinking about this the other day. I think Pippi and Joe are very similar characters. The outside world sees them being strong and independent, and they are, but they are also quite sensitive and vulnerable. But only those that are close to them can see that. Despite of Pippi having good friends like Tommy and Annika, She is quite lonely sometimes. Her mother has passed, and her father is in the other side of the world. Pippi's father, Ephraim, does return at one point, and it is a delight to see them together. I grew up watching the 1970s Pippi TV series, and Pippi's father. So many Fritz Bear vibes. In a lot of ways, Pippi represents a child's fantasy. She is physically strong. She can prevent the authoritative adults disturbing her peace. She has money, and she can live by herself and with her pets and play with her friends all day long. So the lack of parents is great on one hand. She is happy and she can take care of herself pretty well. On the other hand, she is lonely sometimes and misses her father very much. A lot of the adults in the book series, when they get to know Pippi on a more personal level, they begin to trust her. There's a scene that I always liked where Tommy's and Annika's mother agrees to leave her children to stay with Pippi when the parents are away sometime. Some of the neighbor ladies are shocked by this, but the mother is just like, I know Pippi Longstocking. She's a good, responsible kid, and I can leave my children with her. And I quite like that in the books. The quote unquote villains are people from social service and the police who want to stop Pippi from living alone because it goes against the status quo. Then the other adults see that she handles herself pretty well and don't mind. A lot of my favorite books are also picture books because I'm an illustrator. It kind of comes with the job. So the next writer slash illustrator is Finland's second most well-known picture book maker after Tove Jansson, and that is Mauri Kunnas. Oh, Mauri Kunnas has done lots of books, lots and lots of books. He's usually compared to Richard Scarry. There are some similarities, both paint with watercolors, and they have animal characters. Kunnas started as a comic book artist, so that's something that you can see a lot in his illustrations and his work. They are very, very humorous, so that's why I think lots of adults also enjoy them. I mean, he's marketed as a children's book author and picture book maker, but lots of adults like his books as well. He has done books about King Arthur, books about Vikings, Canin Kalevala, which is based on Finnish anthology. There's also a Dog Hill series. I used to love that as a child. So the Dog Hill series tells about Finnish history in the 19th century from the lens of a family that lives on a dog hill, which is a farm. But let's go to my recommendations. First one is a classic. It's the Santa Claus. So Mauri Kunnas also has a series about Santa Claus because it is part of Finnish lore that Santa Claus is actually from Finland. And who can say otherwise? There's a Santa village in Lapland. The first Santa Claus book appeared already in the 80s, and he has made some sequels to it. There is 12 Gifts for Santa Claus. I read that one last Christmas again, and there is Santa Claus and the Shaman Drum, and there is a very famous animation made about it. I'm pretty sure you can find that on YouTube. But the Santa Claus book, it tells the origin of Santa Claus and the elves, and how Santa Claus spends his free time. He goes fishing and he reads detective novels, among other things. The book is really cute, and the illustrations are very funny and adorable, and there's lots of Finnish folklore also in the book. He writes a lot about history and folk tales as well. So that's my first recommendation, and I do know for a fact that this book has been translated into English as well. Many of his books are translated into many different languages. My second recommendation is my personal favorite, and that is the Nighttime book. Kunnas wrote this when his children were small. I think he has 2 daughters and they are my age now. But he wrote this book when the children were small, and he and his wife had trouble sleeping because babies wake up at nights and parents cannot get any sleep. So he wrote this book about insomnia So he wrote this book to children of the things that happen at night. And I just love the premise of this book because I also sometimes have struggled with insomnia. The book is hilarious because it goes through all the things that people do at nights. There's one person / animal character who is practicing opera at night. There's one who is watching TV at night. Then there are all these people who work at nights. There are the garbage trucks that drive at nights. There are planes flying at nights. There are night flights. There are trains going by at nights. There are people camping at night. So it goes through all these things that people do during the night. And I just love this book so much. It's such a great book. Then my last recommendations. Sadly, these books have not been translated into English. You can find them at least in Swedish and Dutch and possibly in German. So if you speak those languages, these books might be available to you. I've been planning to make a whole episode about these books to the Little Woman podcast. This is a Finnish book series that was literally inspired by Little Woman. It is a bit of a shame that it hasn't been translated into English. But if somebody really wants these books in English, please approach Finnish publishers and ask about it. So the book is called Little Vicary, and its sequel, Ulla and Mark. And these books were written by very, very famous Finnish writer, Anni Swan. And she is sometimes called as the Louisa May Alcott of Finland or Lucy Maud Montgomery of Finland. You get the picture what kind of writer she was. Anni Swan herself, I thought, was a very interesting character, very much an early feminist, really interesting person. She came from a very large family, and she very much wanted herself an education. This was beginning of the 20th century. If girl wanted to go to school, they were looked down upon. So she really wanted to go to school and have an education. This is something that she also promoted in her books, that girls should go to school and become educated. Joe March vibes there. She did eventually go to school and she also graduated. And she became a writer. I was listening to a podcast and the person who had written her biography talked about the way Anni Swan's sisters really made fun of that. She wanted to go to school and have an education. That feels so crazy now, that women back in those days would look down upon other women who would like to learn and become educated. But it tells something about the society and the way it was back then. Little Vicary appeared, I think it was in the 1930s, during the time when Little Woman was a very, very, very popular book in Finland. I think nowadays most Finnish people know Little Woman through movies, but back then it was because the book was so good. Little Vicary is very much inspired by Little Woman. It tells about a family that lives in a vicary. The father is a pastor, and the mother comes from a wealthier background. The family is very similar to the one in Little Woman because Joe's father is a pastor. Mommy, I believe in the book, comes from a bit of a wealthier background, or at least like a higher working class background. The main character, Ulla, is a young girl who wants to be a writer, and she's a bit of a dreamer. She's not as temperamental as Joe is. The older sister, Lizzie, wants to go to school. She wants to become very knowledgeable and educated. The oldest sister, Marta, is the Meg of the family. She's very pretty. She wants a family of her own and live happily ever after. There's also Minna and Lotti, who are the younger sisters. They have two brothers. They are Karl and Laurie. I can't tell if Lotti was very much like Amy, but in the second book it's implied that Lotti is going to marry one of the more wealthier boys in the neighborhood. So it's a bit of an Amy and Laurie type of thing, but the Little Vicary has a pretty interesting plot. I don't think people mind if I spoil it because this book hasn't been translated into English. Marta is returning from the city. When she's in the train, she talks to her friend and she says that she would not like to marry a rich man. And there is a rich man in the train and he is kind of smitten by Marta's beauty. His name is Ulrich Schöring. This book takes place in the 19th century, and during that time Finland was part of Sweden. We do get lots of Swedish and Germanic names with the higher class people at the time. Ulrich has just returned from America and he's now a wealthy man. But he's from the neighborhood. He's one of the neighborhood boys. Because he's so fond of Marta, he's going to guide himself as the help. So nobody knows that he's a millionaire. So he's really a millionaire Joe because he's in disguise. And then, of course, Marta falls in love with him and she doesn't know that he's really a really rich dude. Just in the end of the book, we find out that Ulrich is a millionaire. Maybe this book has a bit of a Cinderella complex, but I thought it was hilarious. There's also an orphan boy who works in the farm, and his name is Mark. He does remind me a bit of Laurie. He's very temperamental, and he also plays the fiddle, but he's poor, he's not rich. And in the sequel, Mark goes on a bit of an adventure. He finds a family to himself, but things don't really go the way he would wish them to go. I just read Little Vicary for the first time last year. I really loved the book. I thought it was hilarious, especially these millionaire plots. But yeah, that book was at least loosely inspired by Little Woman. Not so much plot-wise, but definitely the family dynamics, the different personalities of the sisters, and the sisters care for one another. So those were some of my recommendations for people who wish to read Scandinavian children's books. Thank you so much for listening. I will see you next time. Take care and make good choices. Bye.